Ready to uncover some secrets.
I'm in. What are we uncovering?
Secrets behind Shakespeare's Richard III. We're going deeper than just, Winter of Discontent today.
Ooh, I like it, going deep.
We're going to explore the historical drama behind this iconic play and why it still fascinates us, like centuries later.
And luckily, there's no shortage of material to dive into.
That's right. So we're talking historical context, Shakespearean tricks of the trade, and how this play still pops up everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah, like from movies to memes. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's address the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the hunchback on the stage.
Ah, yes, Richard III himself.
Right.
It's fascinating because this play is often, lumped in with the histories, but it's also got this undeniable tragic element.
Right. It's not just dates and battles.
Yeah.
So what makes it more than just a historical retelling?
Well, think about the psychological depth Shakespeare gives Richard. This isn't just a villain twirling his mustache,
No, definitely not.
We're talking ambition, guilt, this constant wrestling with fate. Plus, let's be honest, the body count in this play, Shakespeare at his most dramatic.
And talk about dramatic. This thing is the second longest play he ever wrote. I've heard it's because he assumed his audience was already up to speed on the Henry VI plays.
Absolutely. It's true. Imagine those little winks to the audience, All the references that would have landed even harder for those familiar with the Wars of the Roses.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It's like a whole soap opera already playing out before the curtain even rises.
So this family feud we call the Wars of the Roses, it's not just a backdrop. It's the very heart of Richard's story. And speaking of Richard, he wasn't just a character, right? He was a real king of England.
He was.
But how much of what we see on stage is actually true?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Shakespeare wasn't exactly known for, letting facts get in the way of a good story. It's more about why he made those choices, which we'll get into. But just know, there is some serious creative storytelling going on to shape Richard's image.
Creative storytelling with maybe a dash of, political maneuvering?
Perhaps.
Sounds juicy.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead, can we give our listeners a quick who's who in this Royal Rumble? We've got two houses.
Exactly. Think of it like a massive family reunion gone wrong.
Oh, no.
The Yorks and the Lancasters both convinced they deserve to rule England. And of course, where there's a throne, there's always someone waiting to steal it.
And that someone would be our main man, Richard. How does he fit into all of this?
So Richard is the younger brother of King Edward IV, part of the York family. But let's just say he's not exactly content with being the spare heir.
Oh, I see.
He's cunning, ambitious, and willing to do whatever it takes to get that crown on his head.
Sounds like he'd be real blast at family game night.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the players in this drama?
Well, you've got Queen Elizabeth, Edward V's wife, and her children, including the infamous Princes in the Tower, who meet a rather unfortunate end.
Right.
And then there's the Earl of Richmond, the man who will eventually become Henry VII and put an end to Richard's reign. It's a recipe for disaster, wouldn't you say?
More like a Shakespearean tragedy waiting to happen.
Right.
So give us the play-by-play. What are some of the key moments in this, royal showdown?
Imagine a chessboard where every move has deadly consequences. That's Richard's game. He manipulates, seduces, and eliminates anyone who stands in his way.
Talk about ruthless ambition. Give us the highlights. What are some of his most audacious, power plays?
Well, you have to admire the sheer audacity of him wooing Lady Anne Neville.
Okay.
A woman whose husband he just killed over said husband's dead body.
Oh, my gosh.
If that's not bold, I don't know what is.
Talk about awkward first date material. But it doesn't stop there, does it?
Yeah.
Didn't he also have something to do with those princes in the tower we mentioned?
Ah, yes, that's the infamous Princes in the Tower incident. Let's just say their disappearance is a dark mark on Richard's reign and a chilling reminder of just how far he's willing to go.
Okay, so we've got murder, we've got mystery, we've got this, seriously ambitious main character. You'd think by this point the audience would be totally repulsed.
Right.
But Shakespeare's got this knack for making us root for the bad guy, doesn't he?
It's true, and that's the genius of Richard III. It's dark, no doubt.
Oh, yeah.
But Shakespeare weaves in these moments of, dark humor, often through Richard's asides to the audience.
Right.
We're in on the joke, complicit in a way, even if we're horrified by, what he's doing.
Right. It's like he's letting us peek behind the curtain, showing us the man behind the villain. It's unsettling, but also strangely compelling. We see his ambition, but also this intelligence, this like dark wit.
Exactly. And that complexity makes us question, is Richard fully in control, driven purely by ambition, or is there an element of fate at play here?
True.
Shakespeare loved toying with this idea of free will versus destiny.
It's like that Machiavellian idea we talked about earlier, right? The ends justify the means. But is Richard calling the shots? Or is he just a pawn in a much larger, more tragic game?
Right, and remember, this play was written during a time when the idea of divine punishment, the heavens intervening in human affairs, was still very much alive.
Right.
So audiences watching Richard's rise and inevitable fall might have seen it as both a cautionary tale and a testament to a higher order.
So is Richard a villain, a tragic hero, or maybe a bit of both?
That's the question that keeps us coming back to this play, isn't it? And it's a question that has fueled countless interpretations on stage and screen. Speaking of which, Richard's story hasn't just lived on in the pages of a book.
It hasn't.
No, it's been brought to life in theaters and cinemas for centuries.
It really is amazing to think about how this one play has been reinterpreted and reimagined over time. Each generation finds something new in Richard III. Where do we even begin?
Well, one of the most fascinating things is how impactful even early adaptations were. Take Colley Cibber's version from the 18th century. It was a huge hit, for over 150 years.
Wow, 150 years. That's quite a run. What made it so popular?
It was Shakespeare with a twist. Cibber streamlined the plot, added some of his own lines, some even more dramatic than the original, and really played up the villainous aspects of Richard.
So even back then, they were adding their own, spin on the story.
Oh, yeah.
But when we think iconic Richard III moments, we have to talk about Laurence Olivier's performance.
Absolutely. His 1955 film adaptation is legendary, especially that final scene.
Oh, yeah.
A horse, my kingdom for a horse. It's a line that's become synonymous with desperate longing, even for people who have no idea it originated in Richard III.
It's just one example of how this play has woven itself into our cultural fabric. It's more than just a story. It's a source of phrases and ideas that we still grapple with today.
Precisely. Think about that chilling opening line. Now is the winter of our discontent.
Ooh, good one.
It's powerful, evocative, and it speaks to this universal feeling of unease, of longing for something better. It's no wonder it's been quoted everywhere, from, political speeches to John Steinbeck novels.
It's like Shakespeare reached across centuries and gave us the perfect phrase for those moments when things feel bleak. But there's also this, glimmer of hope for change.
Yeah.
And it's not just those famous lines. There's a sense of Richard III everywhere, from cartoons to modern history.
You're absolutely right. Speaking of history, it's time we address the elephant in the room. Just how accurate is Shakespeare's portrayal of Richard III?
It's true. We've been, dancing around the historical accuracy thing, and let's be real, Shakespeare played it fast and loose with the facts sometimes.
To put it mildly, but that's where things get really interesting.
Right.
It's not just about what he changed, it's about why.
Right.
Remember, this play was written during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, a Tudor.
Right.
Her family had a vested interest in making Richard III look like the ultimate villain.
Ah, so it's not just creative storytelling, it's Tudor PR.
Exactly. They needed to solidify their claim to the throne.
Right.
And what better way than to paint the previous dynasty as, corrupt and power-hungry.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
So Richard gets slapped with this image of being, deformed, almost monstrous.
Right.
In reality, there's debate about his physical appearance.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. It was probably exaggerated for dramatic effect and to play into those, ideas of villainy.
Right, they needed a visual reminder of his supposed inner wickedness.
Exactly.
And speaking of wicked, what about all those deaths Shakespeare lays at Richard's feet? Was he really responsible for bumping off, everyone who dared to cross him?
Let's just say Shakespeare took some creative liberties with the timeline.
Right.
While Richard was no angel, there's no solid evidence to suggest he was personally responsible for all those deaths. For instance, the deaths of his wife's first husband and her father.
Yeah.
Murky circumstances, but nothing directly linking them to Richard.
It sounds like history's full of, unsolved cases, just like those true crime podcasts everyone's listening to these days.
Exactly. And speaking of mysteries, we can't forget the biggest one.
Which is?
Those poor princes in the tower.
Oh, yeah, right.
Shakespeare points the finger squarely at Richard.
He does.
But even today, historians are still debating what truly happened.
Wow.
It's a historical cold case that might never be fully solved.
Intriguing. It makes you wonder how much of history is actually like storytelling, shaping a narrative to fit a certain viewpoint.
That's the question, isn't it? Take the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard's final showdown.
Okay,
Shakespeare gives us this like epic, almost Shakespearean duel between Richard and Richmond. In reality, it's probably much more chaotic, less choreographed.
Right.
But that doesn't make for a good story, does it?
Not quite as dramatic for the stage.
Right.
So we've got this play, Richard III. It's full of intrigue, ambition, betrayal, and some of Shakespeare's most famous lines. But it's also a product of its time, influenced by politics.
Yeah.
Right. By the Tudors' need to, cement their power.
Precisely. But here's the thing, even knowing all that, Richard III still resonates with us.
It does.
It's a testament to Shakespeare's genius that he can take these historical figures, these power struggles, and create a story that still speaks to us centuries later.
It makes you wonder, if we strip away the historical debate, the, Tudor spin, what are we left with? What is it about Richard III that still captivates audiences?
We're left with timeless questions about power, about ambition, about the choices we make and the consequences that follow.
Right.
How far would we go to achieve our goals? Are we in control of our destiny, or are we, as Shakespeare suggests, merely playing a part in a grander design?
That's the beauty of Shakespeare. Right? He gives us these complex characters, these morally gray areas, and forces us to confront those, uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Exactly. He doesn't give us easy answers.
No, he doesn't.
And maybe that's why, even after all these years, Richard III is still relevant. It challenges us to think critically, to question what we know, and to, draw our own conclusions.
So what's the final verdict on Richard III? Ruthless tyrant or victim of Tudor propaganda? A cunning mastermind or a pawn in a larger game? We'll leave that for you to decide.
There's a whole world of history, literature, and performance surrounding Richard III.
There is.
We encourage you to dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and come to your own conclusions about this complex and enduring figure.
Because that's what a deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us.